Soy muy bien la materia. Tenemos ahora al doctor Todd Reyes, trabaja en la Embajada de los Estados Unidos en México. Él obtuvo su grado de abogado en la Universidad de Texas y se desempeña como adjunto regional de Derechos de Propiedad Intelectual para México, Centroamérica y el Caribe del Servicio de Comercio Exterior del Departamento de Comercio. Ante esta posición, el abogado Reeves sirvió como asesor principal en la oficina del Coordinador de Observancia de Propiedad Intelectual, ejecutivo del presidente, donde trabajó principalmente en medidas de frontera y los delitos de propiedad intelectual en el entorno digital. De manera que tiene una experiencia muy amplia y va a compartir lo que han hecho en los últimos años, tanto en los Estados Unidos como en otras partes del mundo. Con ustedes.
Good afternoon. My name is Todd Reeves. I am the Regional IPR Attaché in Mexico City. I cover Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. And unfortunately, I have the unenviable job of being the last speaker of the day, so I'm the person who's standing between you and the beach and cold beer and nice mojitos. So I'll try to hurry up. I'll be around today, tonight, and tomorrow. And I'll probably make a little bit more sense if I have a few beers in me. So we'll go ahead and get started. So I just want to cover a few things on the IP Attaché program. We have roughly 14 to 15 attachés posted all over the world. Mexico, we just opened an office in Peru. We have one in Brazil, Belgium, Switzerland, we have two. Ukraine, we're opening up hopefully soon. Kuwait City, that covers the Gulf states, India, Thailand, and 3 people in China, because we all know that China is a big player in the counterfeiting and piracy world. This is my area. I don't know how I manage this, but I got one of the best postings in our system. Mexico is beautiful. I've only been there about 3-4 weeks now, but I also have Central America and, of course, the Caribbean and lovely Aruba. So our roles are basically to work with the host governments, kind of open a dialogue, kind of try to get them up to what we think are the international standards. What are the international standards? We also do a lot of training, so we provide capacity building for police, customs officers, judges, pretty much whoever will show up. And also raising awareness, and this is a big issue. We have to get the public on board, because if they're not, if I do this again, the public, the consumers, as long as they're purchasing, there's going to be a demand, there's going to be supply. On public awareness, I've done several programs over the last 10-15 years, and I've got a friendly audience here. You're IP practitioners, you understand what's involved, you represent clients who are affected every day by this. But when I'm speaking to a group of customs officers or a group of police officers, undoubtedly there will be 1 or 2 that will say, well, I can't get the legitimate Puma or the genuine Nike or the genuine Microsoft on the market. So I buy a counterfeit. I do it because it's cheaper. I do it because it's easier. That's a hard thing to counteract, especially if there aren't very many genuine articles in the market. But really, we need to get the public engaged and aware of the situation. And I think with the health and safety side of it, which we always try to push very heavily in the U.S. government, pharmaceuticals, health and beauty products, that message is starting to resonate. The attachés also provide advocacy for U.S. companies, so if there's a problem with a registration or a problem with a court case, we can't advocate in the legal system, but we can provide guidance and kind of explanations along the way. As Franklin mentioned, my last position before coming to Mexico was working at the White House with Danny Marti, who many of you probably know, a great person to work with and for. He's the Intellectual Property Enforcement Coordinator. And the one thing that's so important about the IPEC position is what's called the Joint Strategic Plan. And this is a plan that the entire U.S. government buys into, contributes to address enforcement-related issues. I won't go into the details of the Pro-IP Act, which created Danny's office. I'll try to move along here. Wanted to talk a little bit about the National Intellectual Property Rights Coordination Center, or what we call the IPR Center. And this is really just a gathering of 23, and the number is climbing every day, it seems like, 23 different federal agencies that are involved in IP enforcement. And the center's actually in Virginia, not too far from my office in Alexandria. It's in Arlington. And it houses these 23 federal agencies plus 4 international partners. So we have Mexican SAT, we have the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, their customs side. We have Europol and Interpol. And what this center does, in addition to a lot of outreach and working with rights holders, is they receive leads. So these leads come from the public, they come from rights holders, and the center will deconflict. So you'll get a room full of these different agents. They'll talk about these cases, they'll decide who wants to take the lead on it, and then they'll develop the investigation. If they decide not to take the lead, they might farm it out or might send it out to the field for investigation. Mexican SAT, their footprint in the US obviously is in the National IPR Center. We also have a couple officers in our National Targeting Center, just right down the road, a few in Los Angeles, San Diego, El Paso, Laredo, and McAllen. So they're doing good work on that side of the border. I can't say this side of the border anymore, but that side of the border, in partnering with ICE and HSI and CBP. So a few operations that the IPR Center is involved in or has been involved in. Operation Chain Reaction, which was really targeting the US government supply chain, because the last thing we want in our supply chain, whether it's our aeronautical, aviation, or military supply chains, is counterfeit merchandise, especially counterfeit electronic merchandise. Operation Ingenuity, this is again kind of the health and safety side of things. It's targeting automotive parts, aerospace, rail, heavy machinery. So on the automotive, it's mainly your brake pads, wheels, wheels that do not have the metal composition to withstand force. And in the aerospace industry, which is the last thing, as much as I fly around this area, the last thing I want to know is that the plane that I'm flying on has some type of counterfeit component. Operation Apothecary and Operation Plastic Beauty. These are just some interesting images, and I don't know what I just did. They're so interesting I made them go away. I'll stop. Okay, that's obviously not the pointer button. So anyways, the top left and the bottom left pictures are of counterfeit screws and pins that were used in a spinal cord surgery. The center top picture was a person who unknowingly used a contact lens. Counterfeit contact lens is one of the colored contact lenses. And then the top right picture is, I don't know if you can read it, but it's basically lipitorwithoutaprescription.com. It's one of these online pharmacies that we all know about. And then the two bottom right, center and right pictures were an operation in Nassau, Florida last year or a few years ago that targeted health and safety, health and beauty products, and their sanitary napkins, chapstick, you can imagine the other articles. So kind of moving from what the US does, or what HSI and ICE do, kind of moving into the international part of it. The Interpol, they conduct these annual operations, Pangea. So the most recent one was Pangea 7 back in 2014. These are week-long operations targeting counterfeit medicines. And I think in this one, they, just in a 1-week period, they made 237 arrests and seized, I think, $36 million worth of counterfeit pharmaceuticals. I'll skip over that because I think Neil mentioned it earlier. This is another kind of interesting one, Operation Short Circuit, electrical components again. These are anything from, Christmas lights, extension cords, fuse boxes, batteries, anything that could combust and catch fire. And again, this is really kind of targeting more the health and safety rather than, the typical luxury goods area. Operation Team Player. It's kind of a moving operation or a perpetual operation, if you will. ICE and HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, will typically focus on big sporting events, whether it's the NFL Super Bowl, the NBA championships, the NHL championships, and they'll not only go after the hard goods, the counterfeit clothing and hats and other memorabilia that's sold in the parking lot before the game, they'll also target online marketplaces. And then moving to a few other international organizations, the World Customs Organization, I think Neil said a few words on this earlier, but some of the tools that they've developed, the Customs Enforcement Network, and within the Customs Enforcement Network, there's the Customs Enforcement Network National, and also the Customs Enforcement communications tool. And this allows various customs administrations to communicate. So when U.S. Customs gets a lead, they can share it with Mexican Customs, they can share it with Brazilian Customs, and so on. There's also the IPM, which is the Interface Public Member site, and this allows rights holders to upload information about their trademarks and copyrights. And there's actually an iPhone and probably an Android app out there where the customs officers can have that database with them at all times as long as they have a connection. And these are, I presume my presentation will be made available, so I won't read through all these. Another organization, the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, they've developed a container program that allows different ports, different customs administrations to stay in touch. I think one of the statistics I saw recently was any given year, 500 million shipping containers move. And that represents about 90% of global trade, just in shipping containers. Now that number is slowly going down, ever so slowly. Neil and a few other speakers talked about small shipments, express consignment, postal shipments. With the expansion or the explosion of online stores, the way in which these stores ship their merchandise is through the FedEx, through DHL, through the postal services. So even though UNODC and WCO are focusing on containers, I think our shift over the coming years and decades is going to be more towards the express consignment world. UNODC also does a lot on public awareness. They're not like Interpol where they actually conduct operations, but they do quite a bit on making the public aware of the problem. World Intellectual Property Organization. This is where all good IP goes to die sometimes. Hopefully nobody wrote that down. It's an interesting organization. The reason I say that, I spent 3 years there covering WIPO. And the hardest thing that I had to take when I was there as an enforcement person was the Advisory Committee on Enforcement. Sounds really good. Although the division is the building respect for IP, because enforcement is a bad word in WIPO, or at least some think it is. But the Advisory Committee on Enforcement, it's a non-normative body. It was created like that so that there wouldn't be any international law on enforcement coming out of WIPO. There is out of the WTO. But the Building Respect for IP division also, in addition to running the Advisory Committee on Enforcement, they develop, or they don't develop, but they report on case law. There's a compendium online where you can go and you can read about other countries' laws. And they also do a lot of outreach and training. And this is kind of one thing that I like to see happen. They're not spending as much money on all the committee meetings every year like a lot of the other committees do, but they do a lot of outreach and training for police, prosecutors, judges, and customs officers. The Building Respect for IP Division also, or WIPO, also participates in the Global Congress. Has anybody here attended a Global Congress? No? The last one I think was in 2013 in Istanbul. For some reason it's on hiatus. I don't know why, but it is. But the Global Congress in Combating Counterfeiting and Piracy, it's chaired jointly by the World Customs Organization, WIPO, and Interpol, and each year, or each Global Congress, these organizations kind of lead it. I think the last one was led by Interpol in Turkey, if I'm not mistaken. So just to kind of summarize, enforcement conditions in Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean, I think we can all pretty much agree that there's a high level of IPR infringement, inefficient coordination among federal and sub-federal officials and criminal enforcement, lack of resources, and this is nothing just in Latin America. We in the US also have resource restrictions that we need to overcome. That's why we try to work a little bit smarter. Need to bring more IPR-related prosecutions, and this is, I mean, it's easy for me to say up here, it's easy for you to hear, you to tell your client, but when you're talking to a prosecutor who has other things to focus on, violent crime, narcotics, things like that, it's hard to sell. There are some very good examples. Say in the case of Mexico, you've got the Specialized IP Crime Unit, and you also have I guess the larger organization, in PGR, that focuses just on IPR-related prosecutions. Another thing is, once we get these prosecutions underway, we need to impose deterrent penalties against infringers. And we're not talking about the street vendors. We're talking about, and I think as Neil pointed out, and possibly Henry, you have to go up the chain. You have to go up the chain to the source to really make a difference. Suggestion for the region, and these were kind of just initially drafted for Mexico, but I think this really applies everywhere. Provide ex officio customs authority. We have that in the US, and I'll talk just very briefly about our system. Neil talked about the EU. In our system, in the US system, once you, and probably a lot of you already know this, once you record your trademark or copyright with US Customs or Customs and Border Protection, that's it. It's treated as an in rem violation at that point. There's no evidence in the sense, there's no proving the guilty mind. It's the government going against the property. Also, Neil mentioned something about in transit. So customs authorities and attorney general's offices intercept and prosecute in transit shipments of counterfeit and pirated goods. In the United States, this is done. It's under legal fiction, if you will, that any time merchandise is brought in within the jurisdiction of the U.S., it's considered imported, whether it's imported for consumption or imported for transportation. It's still considered imported, and we can apply the customs laws to seize, forfeit, and destroy, all administratively. There's no need to go to court. An importer can elect to go to court, but they rarely do. The last thing they want to do is find themselves before a judge. Also provide stronger protection against unauthorized camcording of motion pictures in theaters. This is another thing that we're really trying to push along. I see it in Mexico, I see it in Russia, I see it everywhere I go. I usually travel, when I'm on these trips, I usually travel on a Friday or Saturday, which kind of corresponds to the latest Hollywood blockbuster coming out. I hit the ground in Moscow, and all of a sudden it's on the street corner before it's even in the theater. So we're really trying to do some work on camcording provisions, and particularly in Mexico. That's it. I was able to keep it, I think, under 15 or 20 minutes. So if you do have any questions, here's my contact information. I'll be around tonight and tomorrow, and wish you a good rest of the conference. Thank you.
estar aquí.
Sí, buenas tardes. Yo le tengo una pregunta al señor Camacho. Es si dentro de las investigaciones que ha realizado la DIGIM ha encontrado alguna participación o interés de grupos ligados al narcotráfico, a la guerrilla, que efectivamente pues manejan un gran cúmulo de dinero. Y si adicionalmente dentro del perfil criminal que había explicado bastante bien usted, han hecho investigaciones relacionadas con el lavado de dinero en relación con el tema de la falsificación.
Gracias por la pregunta. Me parece muy interesante, doctor, y efectivamente de pronto dentro de, sin ahondar de pronto en la información, porque la reserva sumarial que guarda una de las investigaciones, le puedo decir que sí hemos comprobado algunos vínculos que existen dentro de el tema de la falsificación con grupos armados o al margen de la ley, organizaciones criminales o bandas criminales según el caso. De igual manera, siempre y en todas las investigaciones que adelanta la Dirección de Investigación Criminal Interpol DIGIN, nosotros llevamos un proceso paralelo para hacer una extinción de dominio a todos los bienes que son producto de esa economía criminal. Entonces, de igual manera, tratamos y combatimos el flagelo o el delito en cualquiera de sus puntos. Si no hay ese dinero para contribuir o para volver a montar esa estructura o esa organización criminal, la estamos acabando. Eso es lo que trata la DIGIN de hacer. Gracias.
Podría hacer un pequeño comentario. Como presidente de la Asociación Mundial de Juristas, he venido trabajando en un proyecto, primero de tratado, y luego me di cuenta que debía ser una ley. Yo soy venezolano, y la ley la comencé a hacer sobre la ley de prevención y represión de la corrupción y lavado de dinero. Y después que comencé a hacer el trabajo, hace 2 años, fui electo el año pasado, descubrí que también estaba el terrorismo. Y como pienso, se espera que la ley sea vetada por el presidente Maduro, añadí la parte de financiamiento del terrorismo. Hoy encuentro que la ley de Aruba viene por el mismo camino y se llama exactamente igual, y conste que no me estoy copiando, pero se llama una ley sobre prevención y represión del lavado de dinero y del financiamiento del terrorismo. Y el camino son 3 fases. En muchos países viene la corrupción, esconden el dinero, tratan de legitimarlo para hacerlo aparecer como perfectamente legal, y en no pocos casos, hay el caso de un gobernador de un estado en Venezuela, que se le siguieron los pasos y parte de ese dinero corrupto, lavado y luego tratado de legitimar, terminó en el terrorismo. Tanto el banco venezolano como ese terrorista, por supuesto, están bajo los ojos de los Estados Unidos. El banquero se tuvo que ir de los Estados Unidos, le quitaron la visa. Parte de esos productos, de la parte falsificada, también tiene relación con el lavado de dinero, porque lo utilizan para ese propósito y esconderlo. De manera que lo que estamos viviendo nosotros enfrente es de tal envergadura el problema que estamos metidos con la Organización Internacional del Crimen y la banca internacional, porque nada de eso es posible sin la intervención de la banca. Y para hacerles un caso, en Venezuela hay fugitivos 325 billones de dólares, dicho por el Banco Mundial. ¿Otra pregunta? Ya como que estamos todos cansados. Una última pregunta. Bueno, al parecer no la hay. Queremos agradecerle a nuestro director de la propiedad intelectual, nuestro amigo Duber, que nos haya acompañado hasta el final. Le agradecemos a los panelistas y a todos ustedes por esa presencia tan activa. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias a los panelistas, y con esto concluimos la primera jornada de nuestros 2 días de actividades. Solo recordarles algunos aspectos de logística. El día de hoy, para el cóctel de los estudios, los buses estarán saliendo, el transporte estará saliendo a las 6:15 de la tarde.